Well, I was going to say welcome, but welcome back to the downtown DC studios here on Real America's Voice for the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief of thenationalpulse.com, and of course we have an awful lot to talk about today. We also are waiting on breaking news. The Georgia Secretary of State's office has promised us a press conference at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's about a minute ago. My watch is actually wrong, so it's about 3 hours ago on my watch. But I can see already in the warm-up on my screen in front of me where they're waiting to go live at the lectern in Georgia that there is a placard behind where the lectern is. I'm sure you can see it. I hope you can see it on your screens now. It says claim versus fact. So we all know what this is going to be today. This is going to be another attempt by Georgia politicians, Republican politicians, to deny what President Trump said in that phone call, what he's been saying on stages, what the legal team has been saying for weeks, months. But the date approaches very, very rapidly, and we have some great guests to discuss January the 6th with us here in studio. Natalie Winters, Alistair Riviere. But first I want to walk you through what I did last night. Don't worry, it was nothing salacious, certainly nothing particularly exciting. I read the Washington Post. I suppose that is quite salacious, actually. And the Washington Post dumps on its website yesterday afternoon this leaked phone call between President Trump and leading Georgia Republicans. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there could have only been one place that leaked that call to the Washington Post. Well, I suppose there could have been two. There could have been the Chinese Communist Party spying from the Georgians' end, but it was probably Raffensperger and his team recording the President of the United States, a massive breach of national security, and sending it straight to a left-wing newspaper. These are the Republicans that Georgians have had representing them now for so very long, which really makes me wonder why people would bother to go out and continue voting for Republicans in Georgia. But that's not my thing to worry about. That's your thing to worry about, citizens of this country, when and where you exercise your votes. I suppose you have to live with the consequences of them. Make your own minds up. But I want to go through, and those of you that will have listened to the War Room this morning will have heard me going through some of the beginning of that call. But the Washington Post and the political class, the corporate media establishment, what they're hoping is that you don't bother to go and listen to the call, is that you don't bother to go and read the transcript. And you should. We have it up, all of it, up at thenationalpulse.com, so you can make your own mind up. It doesn't actually take that long. It's an hour-long call. You can listen to it on 2 times speed, or if you're Natalie Winters, on 4.5 times speed, and digest what you want from it. However long you get into it, I recommend listening to the whole thing. But let's go through it real quick while I have your attention. So in the opening segment of the call, President Trump rattles through just a flurry of statistics. It's almost a blur. It's boom, 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 boom. 250,000 votes here, 4,500 votes here, 18,325 here, 4,925 there, 2,326. Those are actual numbers he cited in the first 5 minutes of the call. But if you watched and listened to the Washington Post reporting and the CNN reporting that came off the back of that, and the MSNBC reporting that comes off the back of that, all these Chinese whispers, CCP whispers, we'll start calling it, the reporting on reporting on reporting, you would have never known what the president actually said. All you would have been told was that the president threatened the Georgia Secretary of State to fine him 11,000 votes. That actually never happens. Throughout the entirety of the phone call, it never happens. Now, if you clip 30 seconds of it, then yes, it does happen. If you clip 30 seconds of me speaking today on this show, I'm sure you could probably find an endorsement of radical Marxism somewhere, or at least make it up. And that's what the Washington Post did. Enough people started to put pressure on, saying, hey, why don't you actually release what you've got? So then they released 4 minutes. And then, hold on a minute, it wasn't a 4-minute long phone call. Why don't you release the whole thing? Then they released the whole thing, but that wasn't it. They then went back over their tracks and redacted a name from the call. Don't know why, because they didn't retract Matt Braynard's name from the call, another private individual doing work to ensure election integrity. No, they only redacted Ruby Freeman's name. Ruby Freeman, Ruby Freeman, Ruby Freeman. I can say it as much as I want, and so can you. In fact, people have been saying that name online for 2+ months now. So why does the Washington Post redact it from one phone call? Oh yeah, that's right. They don't want to remind you of any of those allegations. It's the same reason that Twitter deleted the New York Post's account when the hard drive from hell came up. Except we all know what it does, the Streisand effect. And that's just the introduction to the phone call. President Trump then goes on to talk about Fulton County and how Fulton County was never given a full, rigorous audit. Oh, they went to Cobb County and did it. Not good enough, he says. He talks about the consent decree, the Georgia consent decree in the phone call. And you can hear Raffensperger and his lawyer, Ryan Germany, kind of go, no, it's not a consent decree. It actually has a different name. Not the point. The point of the order is not the point. The point of the order is what is inside it, not what is at the top of the page, not what its name is. He goes through and you hear Georgia lawyers refusing transparency, refusing public access. And at the end of the call, he summarizes. Right before we go to the break, I'll summarize what he says. It's very simple. In fact, that's what he said. It's very simple. We just want the truth. Quote, it's very simple. We just want the truth. We'll get to more of that truth in the next segment. Stick around. Right, we're going to go through more of the detail of that phone call, what I call the pitch perfect phone call. If the Ukraine call was perfect, which I still think it was, then this was pitch perfect. But before we do that, I want to take you live to the press conference that's going on in Georgia right now. Let's go.
Yes, it's Gabriel. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gabriel Sterling. Good to see you all again. Happy New Year. We are preparing for a major election tomorrow. Obviously, a few things we want to go over, and then we will go into some other items, I'm sure. So, as of right now, we have 962,886 mail and absentee ballots received. There's 281,376 that are still outstanding. I'm hoping to get the military received now conference, which will hopefully come in on my cell phone. In person, obviously we smashed the record for turnout on that one. We're at 2,074,857. So that means right now we're looking at 3,037,743 votes that have already been cast across Georgia. Now, the previous record for a runoff election was a 2004, I think it's right, Saxby-Chambliss race, which was 2.1 million votes that were cast. That is the previous record. And in the election 2018, the runoff election, we saw just under 1.5 million. So obviously a lot of interest. I'm sure Georgians are tired of TV ads, text messages, voicemails, and mail. So it's all going to end very soon, hopefully. In preparation for the election tomorrow on Election Day voting, we have 6,963 poll pads. They finished the final loading of their data today before lunch. We had about 21 counties were the last ones to go. Most of them completed it over the weekend. A total of 2,648 polling locations open on Election Day. We have a couple that have been closed due to some shortages and some other COVID-related items, but the total we have right now is 2,648. We don't anticipate changes, but they always may happen. We have shared those locations with Georgia Power and the EMCs in case there's power issues or any other issues that might come up from that. And we've seen a few shortages of poll workers. So I think specifically we saw in Morgan County, they're going to lose 2 locations because of that. Now, what we've seen also is a difference in the turnout models depending on congressional district and county in this state so far, in large part driven by the continuing misinformation and disinformation concerning the value of people's votes in this state. The Secretary wants me to make clear that everybody's vote is going to count. Everybody's vote did count. I want to make that abundantly clear. If you care about, the values and direction of the nation you want to see, it is your obligation to turn out and vote tomorrow, be you Democrat or Republican. However, right now, given the nature of the President's statements and several other people who have been aligned with him previously, who've literally had rallies saying protest and don't vote, we are specifically asking you and telling you, please turn out and vote tomorrow. One of the things specifically I've had to argue with people whom I've known for 20 years, they say, well, we feel like our election was stolen. We feel like our votes don't count. And I said, okay, I'm not acknowledging that the election was stolen because it wasn't. I'm not acknowledging that there was massive voter fraud because there wasn't. But I said, but if you believe in your heart of hearts that there was, the best thing for you to do is to turn out and vote and make it harder for them to steal. If that's what you genuinely in your heart of hearts believe, turn out and vote. There are people who fought and died and marched and prayed and voted to get the right to vote. Throwing it away because you have some feeling that it may not matter is self-destructive, ultimately, and a self-fulfilling prophecy in the end. So everybody who cares about the future of this nation should turn out and vote. It's vitally important. It's absolutely important. And the reason I'm having to stand here today is because there are people in positions of authority and respect who have said their votes didn't count, and it's not true. And I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to go through all this anti-disinformation Monday. It's whack-a-mole again. It is Groundhog Day again. I'm going to get to talk about things that I've talked about repeatedly for 2 months. But I'm going to do it again one last time, I'm hoping. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure people understand their votes count. Every person, every voice matters. And I know that there's people who fought for that for years about this. Let's start again. And yes, some of this is going to come out of the continuing statements from the President and some of his supporters. State Farm. All right, this has been one that's been conflated over several different things. We have multiple scanned ballots. We have Ruby Freeman. We have the leak that it says a water main break, which wasn't a water main break. So in order to be fully transparent, one of the things we did is we had a local media organization, WSB, Justin over here. We went through it for hours and hours, walked through frame by frame, and showed what happened. So let's start. If you go to securevotega.com, we have posted all the videos from State Farm for that day that cover the relevant periods. 5:23 a.m., they walk in and they discover what is essentially a pond on the floor where you can see water coming out of the sky. So they say, okay, we can't do our work here this morning. They call in the State Farm people. It's not Fulton County people, which is one of the other things they said. There's no Fulton County work order to fix the water leak. And guess what? It wasn't in a Fulton County facility. It was in State Farm. So they were the ones who fixed the leak. And it was a urinal that was overflowed because they were turned off because, guess what? Nobody's in State Farm because of COVID, other than this particular usage. So they turned off all those things, and it went over the edge of the relief valve, and that's what caused the leak. So they come in. Then you go to another one about 7 in the morning or so, where you have essentially the, I don't know what to call it, the drying Zamboni that's driving around on the carpet, cleaning it all up. Then at about 8:23, you see a woman bring in the table in question that has been the point of Mr. Giuliani's 90-second clip. She's pulling it with one hand, and she sets it down. There's nothing underneath it, okay? Then you can fast forward to later in the day, about 9:45 or so. Everybody there are two groups of people there. There's cutters and there are scanners. What happened was the cutters began putting their stuff away because everybody was under the impression they were going to get home. We have discovered this. So they start putting covers over the cutting machines and everything. So then we see also, while the monitors and the press are still in the room, they bring out the carriers, which are normal absentee ballot carriers. And I will admit, when I listened to the audio of the phone call and the President brought that up again, and I heard it on a radio ad again today, I wanted to scream. Well, I did scream at the computer, and I screamed in my car at the radio talking about this because this has been thoroughly debunked. They bring out the normal absentee ballot carriers. There are monitors in the room. There is press in the room. They take the ballots that have been opened, put them in carrier trays, and put them in there, and then put them in the boxes, put the lid on because the lid matches the box, and then you see at one point during the video, a woman crawling on the floor, putting the numbered seals on them so they can keep the chain of custody. Approximately 10:25, 10:30, the Secretary in our office receives word that Fulton County is shutting down for the night at State Farm Arena. So, as some of y'all who were there on election night recall, the secretary got a little irritated with this and made his feelings quite known. He says, some of us will be working through the night. We're glad to see that Fulton County sees the need to just go ahead and knock off for the evening. So Chris Harvey, our elections director, then calls Rick Barron, the elections director of Fulton County, who was at the other location, which was their English Street warehouse, because he was doing election day activities. Chris calls Rick. Rick says, we're not shutting down. Well, Chris says, looks like you are. So then you can go back to the videotape and see Ralph Jones take a phone call of approximately almost 11 o'clock. And you can see his shoulders kind of shrug. He takes the phone call. He's being told at that point by his boss, Rick Barron, you need to stay and continue to scan. So he hangs up the phone. He goes over to some boxes, puts some more seals on them, because obviously, if you watch the videotape, many of the people that are there have been there since 7 in the morning. It's already 11 o'clock at night. They were all under the impression they were going to get to go home. So you see him spend about 30 seconds going, heck, what am I going to say to these people? So he walks back over to the corner of a desk and says, I got the word, we got to keep on scanning. So they go back to the boxes that you see them put under the table at the approximately 10 o'clock hour. There is videotape of this. And this is what's really frustrating. The president's legal team had the entire tape. They watched the entire tape and then, from our point of view, intentionally misled the state Senate, voters, and the people of the United States about this. It was intentional, it was obvious, and anybody watching this knows that. Anyone watching it knows that. That's why we released the entire tape for people to watch. So it's this claim that was done. So they pull those out and begin to scan. Then the other claim comes from about a woman named Ruby Freeman and multiple scanning. One of the things you need to understand is a normal ballot processing, if there is a problem with a ballot, what it does is it stops. But before that, 4 or 5 will get through. So they say delete that last batch and rescan it so they scan properly. That is the normal process that is done. Secondarily to that, everybody might be familiar with the fact that the president wanted us to do a hand recount, a hand retally, which we ended up doing under our audit. That audit showed that there was no problem with machine scanning. If somebody took a stack of ballots and scanned them multiple times, you would have a lot of votes with no corresponding ballots. So let's go over the numbers one more time. Statewide, it was for the sheer number of ballots, they were off by 0.1053%. For the margin, they were off by 0.0099%, which shows that the machines scanned properly. Our counties did a great job of following these batches and doing the hand count properly, appropriately, with scrutiny and with observers. So let's put that to bed right now. And one of the other things we did as part of our transparency is we have put all of those tally sheets online for every county so you can go through and look at them all. And it's at, again, the securevotega.com. Let's see. Let's go over the numbers of the president's team is claiming. We have a little chart over here. They're claiming there were 2,056 felons that voted. Our research, and we have better data because we are directly tied to the state government on this, Department of Correction, and the other department, which I can't remember what it's called right now. Basically, it tracks when people are on probation. There we go. We know exactly how many people voted for this. We have an outward bound of 74 potential people who were felons voted. What that means is that's the biggest number it could be. We will investigate and find out some of these people completed their sentences. Some of these people have the same name and birth date, so there'll be some crossover there. So 74 is the outward bound. It's going to be lower than that. So let's be clear about that. Then there is the claim that 66,248 people below the age of 18 voted. The actual number is 0. Let me be clear. 66,000 versus 0. And the reason we know that is because the dates are on the voter registration. There are 4 cases, 4 where people requested their absentee ballot before they turned 18, but they turned 18 by the election day. That means that is a legally cast ballot. So, again, 66,000, which is the biggest single number they have on these kind of votes, versus 0. They say that there's 2,423 people who voted without being registered. Let's just be clear about this. You can't do it. There cannot be a ballot issue to you. There's no way to tie it back to you. There's no way for them to have a name to correspond back to unless they are registered voters. So that number is 0. Then we've got 1,043 illegally voted using a P.O. box. Again, we're going through the investigation on this. So far, everyone we've seen has been when there is a mailboxes, et cetera, something like that, in a multi-family building, like an apartment. So they will have what looks like P.O. boxes listed in the system, but they're actually the residential address of record for people who live in multi-family housing, like apartments. So that's everything we've seen so far. We haven't seen anybody actually registering to vote at a USPS P.O. box. Next one is 4,926 voted past the legal registration deadline. Again, it's 0. We have 0 record of anybody doing that because the voter registration cutoff is a voter registration cutoff. So there's no corresponding way to do that. They couldn't be issued a ballot because they are not legally within the system of that to have ballots issued. 10,315 who died before the election. Again, our information from the Department of Vital Records, we go through county by county, shows potentially 2. So far, 2. It could change, it could go, but it's not 10,000. 395 cast ballots in 2 states. We're investigating that, but again, and we got double voters, which we're investigating. But again, we're talking handfuls, not tens of thousands. Let's remember, and I think we're all very clear on the number now, that it was 11,779. We've seen nothing in our investigations of any of these data claims that shows there's nearly enough ballots to change the outcome. And the Secretary and I at this podium have said since November 3rd, there is illegal voting in every single election in the history of mankind because there are human beings involved in the process. It's going to happen. It's a question of limiting it and putting as many safeguards as you can in place to make sure it doesn't happen. All right. Oh, yeah. We had part of the hand tally be discussed in relation to the potential double scanning. Let's just go to the other ridiculous claims that Dominion voting machines are somehow using fractional voting or flipping votes. Again, by doing the hand tally, it shows none of that is true. Not a whit. And let's go back to the overall claims about Dominion voting systems in general. If you look in Wisconsin, they're claiming Wisconsin was stolen through Dominion voting machines. In the 14 counties in which Dominion voting machines were used in Wisconsin, the president got 59% of the vote. And in the counties in Pennsylvania where Dominion voting machines were used, he got 52.5% of the vote. He made a claim at one point that over 900,000 votes were deleted by Dominion machines, and the 14 counties where that happened, they had 1.3 million people vote. That was 70% plus, a 76% turnout. In order for 900,000 to have been deleted, they would have had to have 160% or 130% turnout. That did not happen because it cannot happen. Again, this is all easily, provably false. Yet the president persists. And by doing so, undermines Georgians' faith in the election system, especially Republican Georgians in this case, which is important because we have a big election coming up tomorrow, and everybody deserves to have their vote counted if they want it to be, Republican and Democrat alike. Now, let's move on to signature matching. There were claims about signature matching not being done. They were based on feelings. We believe. No specific evidence was ever brought up until in one of the Trump filings there was a specific allegation the signature verification was not being done on the absentee ballot request form properly in Cobb County during the June primary. So that's the first time we had a specific actionable claim of signature match not being done. So with that in mind, the governor graciously offered, after the secretary and he discussed, potentially using GBI resources. So we got GBI to come alongside Secretary of State investigators, multiple teams. Vic Reynolds stood here last week to announce the outcome of that. And of the 15,118 absentee ballot envelopes that they investigated, they found 2 with potential problems. 2. 99.99% was properly done. And of those 2, the actual voter who was intended to be marked as voting was the actual voter. They could have been done through a cure period, which would have been a better way to do that. Another thing they want to talk about is the vast difference in rejection rates. Well, what we've seen is there was not a vast difference in rejection rates. What's happening is, in order to confuse people because they don't understand election systems, is they're conflating the entirety of absentee ballots that were rejected versus those that were rejected for signature mismatch or missing a signature. Now, we're also comparing apples to oranges. In 16, I've done this so long I don't want to screw up these numbers, but I'm going to give the general, don't hold me this exact number, I think it was 0.26%. In 18, it was 0.16%. And in 2020 so far, it's 0.15%. We've gotten some updated numbers on this now. And the difference is, in 2019, HB 316 was passed, which allowed there to be curing of ballots. So there are teams of Republicans and Democrats, young people running around the state as we speak, finding people who have signature issues to cure their ballots. That's going on right now. And the Democrats did a much better job of that during the general election. The Republicans were not prepared. The Democrats had their own forms set up. They had teams set up. They were ready to go. It was sort of a late entry on the Republican side to do some of those. And about 5,000 total ballots were rejected for some purpose, and about 2,600 of those were cured. So that means the final rejection number was around 2,400 ballots, around the total of 5 million, or a percentage of the 1.3 million that we saw that were voted absentee. Let's go into some of the more new things. There is no shredding of ballots going on. That's not real. It's not happening. There's shredding of envelopes that were the non-used ones, or there's also shredding of the secrecy envelopes that came through. We saw some of those in the Senate hearing, and it's obvious that they are the secrecy envelopes, which have no evidentiary value because there's no signature on it. There's no way to match it back. They're just basically trash. The law requires you keep the signature and oath envelopes and the ballots themselves for 22 months. Those are all being kept. Let's see. This is what I don't fully understand. No one is changing parts or pieces.
So you're hearing there from Gabriel Sterling, the Elections Commissioner in Georgia, and I just want to add some context to all the things that we're hearing here and raise some questions with our panel here in studio with me today. So firstly, you've got to understand, Gabriel Sterling, and if he says anything interesting, I'll throw back to it so you guys can hear it, but Gabriel Sterling is effectively saying, hey, all of these claims from the Trump camp and these claims on the phone call, you heard him there, he said, I was screaming at my computer yesterday when I heard it. Well, Gabriel Sterling has been screaming since Election Day, and he's got plenty of reasons to scream. The interesting thing for me here is, firstly, guy and gal, sorry, our men and our woman, he walks through this timeline of events where you're talking about the ballots being under the tables, and we've all seen the video footage now of the black cloths on the tables, the ballots come out, people are dismissed. We know they were dismissed because guess what? People's tweets from that night are still up saying that they were dismissed at a certain point in the day. But it's interesting, Sterling there walked through it, and he was at 5:23 a.m., and then he's at 8:23 a.m., and then he's at 9:45, and then suddenly we're at 10:25 p.m. And he just kind of skips over a whole thing, and he says, oh, there was water falling from the sky. What was it? It was a burst urinal. What urinals are on the sky? What urinals are in the ceiling? You know, none of that actually made sense. And Natalie, you were saying in there, while we were watching it, it would have been good to have some visuals, right? He's saying it's all on camera. Why isn't he putting it up there?
Yeah, it's a bit of a bizarre press conference to be debunking these claims, yet he's not showing the videotapes. It was pretty hard to follow, even as someone who's followed these video in the election very closely. Even I was kind of wondering what he was talking about. And I remember we had a story up about how there were texts from local officials on the ground disputing the fact that a water pipe or a water main had broke, and yet it seems that incident also just conveniently was not touched on during this press conference.
That wasn't us, that was State Farm, but then one of our guys got onto State Farm, and all of, it didn't make sense. Alistair, you are a legal mind. If somebody presented that case, even as a defense case in a courtroom, you'd be like, hold on a minute, show the actual evidence, show your exhibits, don't walk us through your claims.
Well, that's the thing, it's more of a political speech at this point, either way. I think what strikes me is they're not only refuting the claims of the president, but they're saying essentially they ran the best election ever. So I don't know if we're living in different realities, but there clearly has been an issue. I think the implementation of new rules in various states for how to vote during the pandemic were poorly thought out, rushed, and gave the opportunity for at least the appearance of fraud. And so I think it's a problem to have officials like that who are, it's one thing to dispute the claims and try to bring up the evidence, but it's another thing to just say, like, half the country's crazy. The doubts you have are just a madman who's telling you to doubt everything.
And by the way, take our word for it. Right? Not here's the evidence.
And I think he mentioned that there might have been 4 people who were dead on the voter rolls.
He said 2, I think.
2 or 4.
Yeah.
The point is, there are districts where there's dozens of people who die between the day where they're registered and when they vote. And so it's absurd to think that in Georgia there's 4 people who are dead.
Well, that's a really
it seems like a political
interesting point
statement.
because, and I went through the call, and I commit a lot of things that I read the first time or hear the first time to memory. And when he just said what he said was 10,000 people alleged dead voters. Actually, on the call yesterday, it's 5,000 is the number that's mentioned by Raffensperger. Raffensperger says during the call, he says to the president that Brainerd came with a number of 5,000, and in fact there were 2. Up there, Sterling says it was 10,000 have been alleged and it was 2. So they can't even get the allegations straight, let alone debunk them properly. But Brainerd came on the war room this morning. He said, I never said anything like that. He said, I sent all of my documentation to the Secretary of State of Georgia's office. They have all of it. They can go through all of it. And I never alleged that large number. And there was 66,000. Gabe Sterling just now said somebody alleged 66,000 underage votes. There is no mention of 66,000 underage votes in the call with Raffensperger yesterday. So you see this straw manning of the argument. They're taking claims. Maybe other people have made them, maybe they've seen tweets, whoever, and they're kind of attributing these as the main allegations that are being made when they're not. The last one that really caught my interest there was when he talked about the apartments. He said apartments are listed as PO boxes. No, they're not. No, they're not. That's not the way that works. You don't, just because you live in an apartment building, your name and address on the voter roll doesn't magically become a PO box or interpreted by the system as a PO box. And by the way, if it does, then you've got a problem in your voting system. So either that was a live admission that they're doing something and processing something really weirdly and incorrectly in Georgia, or again, he has no bloody clue what he's talking about.
Well, I'd also add, I think it's interesting, he was talking about the now infamous clip that we've seen of the suitcases being pulled out from underneath tables with ballots contained in them. He talked about it in a very euphemistic way. I think he admitted that there were suitcases. He just kind of jumped around the timing, and as you said, after this press conference, as you said, jumbling the numbers, using fake numbers, misconstruing arguments, I certainly have less faith than what I already had in their ability to conduct elections.
So I want to go back to this now. Let's go back to the press conference. Let's see if there's anything else interesting or ridiculous that Gabe Sterling and the others have to say. You can go to it here.
As best they can in such a way, and it will be voted on by the House and Senate. We anticipate that, and that will prove our certification was proper at the end of the day, and that we follow the process properly. And I give you back to Senator Tom Cotton's statement from earlier today that says this is the process that we follow. This is the appropriate step under the Constitution, of the laws of the state of Georgia, and the laws of the United States. So, with that, I want to say, if you're a Georgia voter, if you want your values reflected by your elected officials, I strongly beg and encourage you, go vote tomorrow. Do not let anybody discourage you. Do not self-suppress your own vote. Do not make a self-fulfilling prophecy out of doing this. Don't let anybody steal your vote that way. And that's what's happening. If you self-suppress, you are taking away your important voice from this election. So with that, I'll go ahead and take any questions y'all got. Sorry? Oh, sorry. I didn't know there was a microphone back there. Justin.
Yeah. Hey, is the Secretary of State or the State Election Board considering asking either the Fulton DA or the Georgia Attorney General to investigate the call with the president over the weekend?
I do not know that.
Any discussions of that?
Not that I'm aware of.
From all of you said there, I mean, do you believe, as some have said, that what happened in that phone call was an attack
I'm
on
having a really hard time hearing you. I apologize.
I'll come down there. Do you believe, as some have said, that this is an attack on democracy?
There we go.
Well, if there's going to be any British accents on this channel, it's going to be mine. Welcome back to the show. I want to discuss a few more of the things that we've heard there from Gabe Sterling at that Georgia press conference. He talked just now about voting and about it being a self-fulfilling prophecy for Georgians to not want to cast their votes in favor of candidates and a party that they feel hasn't done enough to tackle election fraud. That is not a self-fulfilling prophecy. That is a fulfilling their duty as voters, right? You have the option to not. You have the option to withdraw. You have the option to withhold your consent. You're not forced to go out and mark a box that says R just because it's the only box on the ballot that says R, nor should you ever do that. That's the joke we make about the left, right? In England, we say put a red rosette on a donkey and they'll vote for it. Labour Party's colours are red. Over here, it's blue, right? So the point is, he's saying vote anyway? Vote anyway? Lend your credibility and the birthright that people have died for to fraudulent things just cause? I also want to draw your attention to something here. Now, I haven't read this whole thing, but as with many of these things, the kind of focal point or the inflection point or the jumping off point in terms of media is the Atlantic magazine. They kind of act as the laundering operation for the left's talking points. They did it with the Transition Integrity Project. You'll remember they did it with the fake and phony comments supposedly attributed to President Trump about the military. They're an institution that does, for a living, launder fake news and tries to create real news stories off the back of it. And Edward Isaac Doveri, that's a name that comes up a lot because actually he is a particularly virulent propagandist in this sense. Now, he actually interviewed Gabe Sterling in early December. And I wanted to just read you this. It just stood out at me when I was going through this. Edward Isaac Doveri asks Gabe Sterling, when did you start to get the sense that this election was going to be a weird one for you? And Gabe Sterling, who you saw on the screen just now, he said it wasn't election night. In fact, on election night, we were doing sort of a victory lap. We were doing a victory lap on election night. You're doing a victory lap on election night, an election that we now know whether or not you accept that there are these problems in the votes, you accept that there was a burst water main, you accept that State Farm was evacuated at a certain point, you accept that people were sent home and that there was confusion about people being sent home, you accept that people weren't in the room that should have been in the room, and that people were told different things. He walked us through some kind of a timeline just now about, at 5 o'clock this happened, and then in the video at 8 o'clock this happened. Well, that's nothing to do with victory lap over. And they knew at the time that those things had happened. No, he was doing a victory lap because Gabe Sterling is a never Trumper, worked for Marco Rubio, and never, ever, ever cared about America First. That's what the victory lap was over. He knew full well what was going to happen there. I want to open it back up to our guests in studio here, Natalie Winters, senior reporter at the National Pulse, Alistair Riviere, our in-house, let's say, legal consultant, correspondent, whatever you want. Pick your own title.
The advice is not included yet. But
right. It's not actual. I'm not asking you for legal advice. I'm asking you for advice on what these guys are saying to us. So again, what did we hear? We didn't hear an awful. If you hold a press conference, right? Don't get up there and be like, kind of at this point there was this, and then at this time. He didn't even have the times. He said somewhere between 10:30 and 10:45. Well, if you got the tape, he says we've got the tapes. If you got the tape, go on the tape, look at the timestamp on the tape, and report that accurately back to the public.
I think what's concerning here is that he had a very excited tone. He was even talking about how he was screaming in his car. And he's trying to project an idea that there's this calm process that's just occurred. And at the same time, you have Senator Perdue, I think, who also is in favor of objecting to the votes on January 6th, or at least the count of the Electoral College vote. So clearly, officials in Georgia disagree about whether or not this was a clean election. And the fact that that's not acknowledged in a more peaceful tone, and that he basically is just accusing anyone who questions this as being completely conspiracy bound, is a problem for our democracy. And he doesn't acknowledge it, and he's just like, you have to go to vote without questioning what I'm telling you.
Well, I just don't have much to say because I don't
Fine.
really understand what he was saying. There wasn't that much substance. Not only did he get the facts wrong, but even if you give him credibility on those disputed numbers that he used, I don't really understand what he was saying. I thought there would be more effort put into this. And frankly, my question would just be, where is Brad Raffensperger? I would want to hear from him as opposed to the person who's conducting the elections, especially after that phone call was released.
You see, Natalie Winters has just hit upon the genius of Raheem Kassam in playing that press conference. Why, 20 minutes before this show, did I text the producers and say, I want to carry the press conference live? Because that's exactly what I knew was going to happen. You see, the arrogance of these people. They get up on a stage and they think they can stand up there with a little placard behind them, right? And a nice seal of the state of Georgia in front of them and say anything and get away with it. Why? We heard a couple of questions there, nothing pushing back. You imagine that was a Donald Trump press conference. The first question would have been hostile, the second question would have been hostile, the 54th question would have been hostile, the 101st question would have been hostile. He doesn't get asked, Sterling doesn't get asked any tough questions. And guess what? If I tried to register to go down to that press conference and cover it, I wouldn't get press accredited to go and ask a question, right? So he doesn't get asked the tough questions. He thinks he can go up there and say whatever he wants because in the room, he can. And then what happens is the stenographers from the political establishment, just watch. CNN, The Atlantic, MSNBC, all of that will be running that clip or clips from that all day and saying, Trump trounced by Republican election official. No pushback, no questions. They're not even smart enough. The stenographers at CNN, Potato Man Brian Stelter, Potato Boy Oliver Darcy, they can't even in real time. We're doing this live right now, right? They could not in real time watch that and recognize the 4 or 5 different things we just pulled out. An apartment is a P.O. box? 66,000 underage voters? Trump never said that in the call. All of these things, the timeline that doesn't make sense. The urinals on the ceiling. Brian Stelter would be trying to pee in one of the urinals on the ceiling. That's how thick these people are. They are stenographers. They take their cues from the establishment, just like this Atlantic article I've got up in front of me, right? Edward Isaac DeVere, Gabe Sterling, taking the victory lap on election night. And by the way, you'll scroll, I can do this real time. I talk to you and read this at the same time. I'm scrolling down the article right now. I'm finding things that I could read off to you. Here, okay, here you go. Sterling. The whole idea of these non-partisan panels, there's no such freaking thing. Everyone has their own feelings and their own thoughts. People who say they are completely independent or non-partisan are not being honest with themselves. It's also not necessarily easy, but if you've got a job to do, you just do the job. Self-contradictory. He just said that everyone has their own feelings, their own thoughts, implicating him in having his own feelings and his own thoughts on the election and on the fraud. And then he goes on to say, if you've got a job to do, just do the job. No, you just told us that nobody has a non-partisan way of approaching these things. And Gabe Sterling, guess what? You are a partisan, but you're not a Republican partisan. You're a uniparty partisan. You're a party of Davos partisan. You're a Chinese Communist Party partisan. You're a party of the establishment partisan. That's who you are. That's what you do. And you admit in this Atlantic article that you cannot just do your job. This is called real-time comprehension, right? I'm going to teach Brian Stelter how to do it one day. I know we've got a quick break to go through, and we're going to pivot after the break as well. We've got another guest to bring on here as well because there's so much more breaking news going on right now. Natalie, you've had a couple of amazing stories up on the National Pulse. QCEF, right? This is the big story, and it's a huge story, actually. QCEF is the propaganda laundering operation for the Chinese Communist Party, and we're starting to recognize how almost every single establishment, politician, media organization in the United States has been touched by QCEF at some point.
Whether it's academia, think tanks, former congressmen, even current congressmen, senators all the way up to the top down to the treasurer of St. Louis. These individuals have gone on sponsored trips, had private dinners, held private meetings with this organization, which is totally linked to the Chinese Communist Party. It's really the top dog in what's called their United Front campaign, which is how they really try to subvert Western elites, American elites, into really doing the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party. So we have a lot more reporting coming out on that. Most recently, we exposed kind of a top headlining Biden backing Republican. She also backed Hillary in 2016, so not really Republican by any use of the word, but she traveled to China on the dole of QSEF in exchange for essentially favorable coverage in Western media. Every other Western media outlet has done the same, and right now I'm looking into their influence in academia, specifically textbooks at the K through 12 level.
These stories have been doing insane traffic at the National Pulse as well. I want to make sure that you all go over there, thenationalpulse.com, share all of Natalie Winter's scoops, share the full transcript along with my analysis of that Trump call, the pitch perfect call. We'll be back in just a second with more. All right, welcome back to the National Pulse. I want to say a great big thank you to everybody who's been sharing our articles, joining up as members. Had a huge influx over the Christmas and New Year period. If you want to join up, you get access to a private Discord chat channel with me. There's about 250 odd people in there now. We chat all day long. They give me notes about my shows and my dress sense and all sorts of other things. You can go to thenationalpulse.com/support. You also get a host of other things. And if you join as a lifetime member, then you and I will actually have a one-on-one phone call. So if you fancy that and the inside scoop about what's good on the Morton's Terrace, feel free to join up there. I want to bring on now Terry Schilling is the Executive Director of the American Principles Project. And I wanted to have him on because the lead story at the Pulse at the moment is an extraordinary interview conducted by Stephen K. Bannon with the former Archbishop Vigano, calling Joe Biden an irreparable China complicit disaster and really talking about this great reset versus this great awakening that we're seeing taking place all across the Western world right now. I mean, the breaking news for those of you who want it is that Britain is now going into another full national lockdown that's been announced during this show. And you see these great reset things taking place all over the place, just trying to throttle the life out of ordinary people, families, businesses, and so forth. So, Terry, I wanted to understand from you, and for our audience who don't really know who Vigano is, why is this such an important moment and such an important interview?
Well, thanks again for having me on, Raheem. So you had to think of Archbishop Vigano as like the minority leader in the Vatican, right? He's the anti-Pope Francis. He knows where all the bodies are buried. He's been involved. He's been a cardinal for the longest time, and he was the papal nuncio from 2011 to 2016 for the Vatican. And basically that means that he's the spokesperson for the Vatican. Now, basically, the reason that this interview is so important is because he's exposing this global plot between the deep state and the deep church. And one of the things that I found most fascinating was him talking about how Benedict XVI, who was the Pope before Francis, was pushed out, and how that all came to be. He didn't give all the details, but he said that there was a coordinated push from this St. Gallen's mafia that was in the cardinals, the group of cardinals. And basically, the communists and the global elites have figured out that there were two things standing in their way in the 20th century that kept them from a global takeover of communism. And that was America and the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church at the time was led by JP2, who was obviously an outspoken critic of communism, in America, which was led by the biggest anti-communist leader America's ever had, President Ronald Reagan. And what the communists and the globalists have done now is they've basically taken over the church, and they've taken over America with the ascension of Joe Biden. It's a global nefarious plot, and they're winning right now.
Well, I'll remind you, Terry, that the name of the book is The President, the Pope, and the Prime Minister. So not two, but three things that were holding the crazy tyrannical Marxist. I mean, the evil. It's evil, right? Is what we're talking about here. Real evil, not televisual evil, not movie style evil. Real sort of forces of darkness, evil in the world that we're talking about here. So what does he actually say? And I'm glad, by the way, that you say Vigano, because I say Vigano, but everybody in America says, no, it's Vigano. He goes by Vigano. We're going to go with Vigano. Terry, what is Archbishop Vigano actually saying here? What is he telling ordinary people to do? What's the action point? This is an action-based audience. What is the action point that comes out of this interview?
So he gives three things that Americans and Catholics need to do in order to respond to this crisis. The number one is to make yourselves aware of what's happening and this global conspiracy against us and against the church. The number two is to attack it, speak out. Be outspoken against this evil and oppose it with all your might. And number three is obviously, since he's Catholic, is to pray. Pray to God that he spares us from all of this. Because all three of those things are absolutely necessary. You know, I think that the first step, obviously, is becoming aware. A lot of people just don't realize that there is this global cabal. There's this global power structure that is pushing for this great reset. And what they mean by a great reset is the total collapse of the world that we know today, the family, the nation, the church. They want to collapse everything and coagulate it, rebuild it, build back better, as Vigano points out, was Joe Biden's campaign theme. And it's a disaster. And so the first thing we have to do is be aware, second is speak out, and the third is to pray.
It's build back Bolshevik is the real plan here. Terry, I remember, you know, from my ivory tower in London, the intellectual ivory tower of the world, some would say, or at least it has been in the past, looking over at America and watching shows like this and hearing, you know, things like that, the Great Reset, the Great Awakening. And I'd often think, I mean, we're talking about 10 years ago now, I'd often think to myself, wow, look at these crazy conspiracy theory Americans. They love all of their wild theories and they got their hair on fire about everything. And then slowly but surely, it has come to be real. It has come to be in everything. Every single thing is politicized. Everything is about transgenderism and gender and attacks on the family. And you guys have this, you know, BLM report that's out now, I think, that walks through all of that. Everything has become about like Marxism and politicization of every single thing that we do. And I just regret that I didn't see it sooner. Terry, just tell our audience who want to get involved and who want to learn more where they can find out more about the American Principles Project and what you guys do.
Thanks, Raheem. Yeah, no, so we're building the NRA for families, and we're pushing back against this Marxist agenda everywhere that they're fighting it, from the BLM movement to the anti-family movement to our schools. So you just go to AmericanPrinciplesProject.org, and there's a big red sign up to volunteer button, and just click that button and sign up to volunteer. We will put you to work. Right now, we're engaged in Georgia. We get involved in campaigns and races and legislation all year round. We really need more help. And, you know, this is the movement against the globalists. This is the movement against the Marxists. It's the family. The family is going to be what protects the nation and what protects us against all of this Marxism.
It's the strongest bulwark that we have. Terry, thank you, Terry Schilling, for joining us on the National Pulse today.
Hey, thanks, Raheem.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to stick around. David Brody and the Water Cooler are up next. We're going to be breaking more news over at the National Pulse, specifically, Alistair, what your friend Emmanuel Macron is doing with vaccinations in France and the crazy stories coming out of France at the moment. Vacre bleu. You don't like that one. We'll see you again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Head on over to thenationalpulse.com. Thanks for tuning in.